Chapter 9. In-laws, Incest Taboos, and Rituals. One evening in the village of Tethi on Yasawa Island, Fiji, I was drinking kava by lantern light at a crowded social gathering. Made from powdered roots mixed with water, kava is a ritually served beverage that numbs the tongue and imbues one with a peaceful feeling. In Fijian style, we were all sitting on comfortable woven mats, with the higher status, older men, sitting toward the private end of the one-room house, and lower status people arrayed toward the other end. On this particular evening, I had achieved a small anthropological victory, as I'd managed to sit in the middle of the room with my age mates, and had not been ushered immediately to the high-status end as a guest. Just as I was wondering when the next round of kava would be served, I looked up to see a neighbor, Kula, appear at the open doorway. He spotted me immediately. I stand out among Fijians, and noticed the open space next to me in the otherwise crowded room. Flashing a big smile, the young man crouched according to custom as he made his way toward me. As Kula slid into position, while greeting me, his back pressed accidentally against a young woman. Almost immediately, with laughter breaking out, Kula was poked by his cousin and told that the girl behind him wanted to chat with him. Kula turned around to see who was behind him. He immediately looked terrified as he realized that, in the dimly lit room, he'd sat down beside, and inadvertently brushed against, his sister. This behavior, though unintentional, was completely inappropriate and embarrassing. Of course, as usual, I was initially confused and not laughing, because I still hadn't quite pieced together what had just happened. With shame oozing down his body, Kula stood up and quickly exited, disappearing into the darkness. He did not return that evening. Kula had sat down next to one of his many classificatory sisters, who, by most listeners' kinship taxonomy, would have been Kula's distant cousin. In these communities, as in many small-scale societies, certain types of cousins are labeled as brothers and sisters, and they are supposed to be treated like one's real, genetic siblings. In anthropological parlance, these classificatory siblings are your parallel cousins, which include your father's brother's children and your mother's sister's children, but not your mother's brothers or your father's sister's children. These cousins, your parents' opposite-sex siblings' children, are your cross-cousins, who are kind of like your official friends and potential lovers. Following the same logic, people also have classificatory siblings through their great-grandparents and beyond. Kula had violated, in a small way, the local incest taboo, which prohibits any direct interactions with one's opposite-sex siblings, real or classificatory. This taboo requires that opposite-sex siblings avoid interacting at all, which precludes talking or even sitting near each other. Of course, sex or marriage is out of the question, as is touching or being alone together. The logic here is that any touching or talking could blossom into sex and marriage, so it's best to nip this in the bud. Kula had infringed on this incest taboo by sitting next to and incidentally touching his sister cousin. Almost gleefully, Kula's cross-cousin highlighted his mistake by suggesting that he talk to his sister cousin, an action that would have made things much worse. It was a joke. Cross-cousins have reciprocal and egalitarian relationships, which are reinforced and affirmed by constant joking. This joking relationship is totally unlike the relations of respect and authority between, for example, real and classificatory brothers of different ages. Kula's mishap opens a window on how traditional societies operate and organize themselves, which illuminates something of the social worlds experienced by both our ancestors and much of the world today. Even the smallest scale human societies, unlike primate societies, are built on and organized around a set of kinship norms. While no doubt grounded in innate psychological processes that influence how we locate and treat our close genetic relatives and reciprocal partners, these social norms variously reinforce, extend, and suppress aspects of our genetically evolved psychology. Building on this idea over the next 3 chapters, I will show how the emergence of social norms drove a genetic evolutionary process of self-domestication that dramatically shaped our species' sociality. To begin, in this chapter, I'll introduce you to some of the ways in which cultural evolution grabbed hold of our innate psychology and harnessed it to expand human groups and our social networks. This created new forms of social organization that intensified the cooperation and sociality in our evolutionary lineage. Along the way, we'll take a closer look at social norms related to marriage, fatherhood, incest, and rituals. In Chapter 10, we'll see how intergroup competition has long shaped cultural evolution to favor the proliferation of pro-social or group-beneficial norms and the formation of more complex institutions, packages of social norms. These norms and institutions have long been important selection pressures on our species' genetic evolution. Then, in Chapter 11, we'll bring all these observations together and focus on the impacts of this culture-driven process of self-domestication on our psychology. This view contrasts sharply with the canonical view of the evolution of human cooperation. For decades, evolutionary researchers, from Richard Dawkins to Steven Pinker, have argued that humans are able to organize and cooperate so effectively because our psychology has been shaped by the evolutionary forces of kin selection and reciprocal altruism, reciprocity. Our kin psychology evolved genetically because it permits us to bestow help or benefits on individuals who are genealogically related to us and thus likely to share particular altruistic genes. Our reciprocity psychology emerged as natural selection readied us to take advantage of the potential for ongoing tit-for-tat exchanges of benefits, or costs, with others. In what's to come, I will be substantially augmenting and amending this canonical view. We'll see that not only are kin selection and reciprocal altruism insufficient to explain cooperation in the modern world or in other complex societies, they are insufficient to explain cooperation in small-scale societies, including nomadic hunter-gatherers. So, though humans certainly do possess innate proclivities for helping our kin and engaging in reciprocity, these are, in and of themselves, too weak or narrowly delimited to explain cooperation in real human societies. For example, though motivations to help close relatives can be strong, even in small foraging bands, the average other person is a quite distant relative, and bands contain many non-relatives. By studying a diversity of real small-scale societies, we'll see how understanding human cooperation and sociality requires exploring how our social instincts are harnessed, magnified, and recombined within an interlocking web of culturally evolved social norms. We'll see that cooperation, even in small nomadic hunting and gathering societies, hinges on the existence of culturally constructed norms that substantially augment our innate proclivities. Social norms and the birth of communities. At some level, it should be uncontroversial that culture shapes the kinds of kinship relations that I described at the outset of this chapter. Kula's behavior, when he sat down with me, was being monitored by other members of his community, who started giggling among themselves almost as soon as he sat down. The question is, why did the community care that Kula sat down next to his classificatory sister? If the pair's shared ancestor had been opposite-sex siblings instead of same-sex siblings, then Kula could have brushed her back unintentionally and made sexual jokes toward her without a negative reaction from his fellow villagers. Instead, shame crashed over Kula, and an otherwise enjoyable party was ruined because he felt compelled to vanish into the night. The origins of this form of sociality lie in our cultural learning abilities, which became increasingly sophisticated over our species' evolutionary history. As we discussed in Chapter 4, simply by observing others, we can acquire ideas, beliefs, values, mental models, tastes, and motivations. Growing up in Tethi, as in many other places throughout the world, means gradually acquiring and internalizing the notion that sexually mature males and females who stand as classificatory siblings ought not to interact in direct ways. Cultural learning means that it's possible for people to acquire notions of how people should behave, both toward others and even in purely non-social situations. Deviations from proper behavior evoke negative emotions toward the deviant, even in uninvolved third-party observers. In Chapter 11, we'll discuss that even very young children respond negatively to violations of completely arbitrary rules. In exploring culture-gene coevolution so far, we've begun to see how effective cultural learning is for acquiring tastes, for performing all manner of costly actions, including even food preferences that require overcoming our innate aversions, as we discussed with chili peppers. Building on such empirical observations, evolutionary researchers have been using mathematical modeling tools to ask this question: what happens when people culturally learn from others, and then those acquired behaviors, strategies, beliefs, or motivations influence future social interactions? The answer from cultural evolutionary game theory is that social norms spontaneously emerge. Groups of individuals who engage in social interactions and learn from each other using cues like success and prestige often end up sharing similar behaviors, strategies, expectations, or preferences, and deviations from these shared standards are penalized or sanctioned in some way. Or, in some cases, individuals come to share standards for valuing uncommon excellence, for rewarding individuals for going above and beyond the standard. Either way, the resulting behavioral patterns are stable in the sense that they tend to endure and resist efforts by one or a few individuals to change them. In both the real world and in many of these mathematical models, norm violators are sanctioned by the effects of reputation. When individuals break social norms, it often doesn't impact them immediately, though it may. Rather, observers of the violation spread the word about what happened, and this gossip has negative consequences downstream for some later interaction. What is often underappreciated is that reputation itself is merely a type of cultural information that spreads because of many of the same psychological abilities that underpin other types of culture. Once our ancestors could learn from each other, say, about which foods to eat or how to make a tool, we could also learn from each other about whom not to build a long-term relationship with for activities like hunting, sharing, mating, and raiding. Sophisticated language is not necessary, since I can convey my feelings about an incestuous norm violator to a friend in the same way I communicate my feelings about vegetarian hot dogs to my wife, using my disgust expression. Two other interesting results arise from studies using cultural evolutionary game theory. First, it turns out that any behaviors, underpinned by certain beliefs, strategies, or motivations that call for individuals to pay personal costs, such as not eating a tasty type of food, for example, bacon, or not having sex with an attractive distant cousin, can be sustained by cultural evolution, for example, through reputational damage. Norms even make non-social behavior, for example, masturbation, into social behaviors, because uninvolved third parties come to care about such behavior. Second, social norms will tend to remain stable even when they help neither the group nor the individual. In fact, cultural evolution can produce sticky social norms that are bad for everyone. Ethnographic examples are numerous and range from cutting off the clitorises of young girls, female genital cutting, to consuming the brains of dead relatives at funerals, which can transmit a deadly prion disease. Social norms make it possible for humans to solve, often without anyone understanding how, what would otherwise be inescapable social dilemmas. Social life is riddled with chances to exploit others, which most people don't even notice. And the more individuals interact and trust each other, the greater the opportunities there are to exploit others, to cheat or free ride on the efforts of others. Culture has several tools and some secret tricks, but two are most important. First and foremost, it brings in third parties to monitor, reward, and sanction others based on local culturally transmitted and widely shared rules. When necessary, it incentivizes third-party actions in some way, often to sanction norm violators. Second, by providing mental models of situations and relationships, it directs our attention away from opportunities to exploit others and reframes situations in ways that tap or harness our instincts in distinct and often pro-social ways. Behaviors like smoking, eating horse meat, or littering can go from perfectly acceptable to disgusting once new culturally transmitted mental connections are made. This is how, over tens of thousands of years, cultural evolution forged primate troops into human communities. Now, let's take a deeper look at how social norms have shaped small-scale societies. From kin to kinship. To understand how cultural evolution has shaped our kinship systems and our forms of social organization over our species' evolutionary history, I'll use non-human primates as reference points. Hereafter, I'll just say primates instead of non-human primates. This makes sense, since if you go back far enough, our ancestors were just another primate. By drawing lessons from across the primate order about kin relationships and forms of social organization, we can begin to infer what cultural evolution and culture gene coevolution has done, and what it continues to do. Let's start with marriage. Marriage institutions are sets of social norms, including beliefs, values, and practices that regulate and reinforce our pair bonding instincts. By firming up this somewhat flimsy bond, marriage norms can buttress spousal relationships and create a final, in-law, relationships. They can also strengthen the paternal side of a child's kinship network. The innate psychological foundation of marriage is a long-term pair bonding instinct, which humans appear to share with some other apes, including gorillas and gibbons, as well as with some monkeys. This instinct can be thought of as a potential strategy, which may be deployed depending on the context. We don't have to pair bond. It's not like peeing, but it's one of the things we'll be inclined to do under some circumstances. The term pair bonding is often confused with notions of monogamy. It's important to realize that pair bonding does not imply monogamous mating. Pair bonds form between dyads. but a single individual can have multiple pair bonds. Gorillas, for example, often form long-term pair bonds with multiple females at the same time. In humans, both historically and cross-culturally, individuals often pair-bonded and married more than one other person at a time. 85% of human societies permitted polygamous marriage in some form. Here, pair bonding refers to enduring, or at least not ephemeral, relationships between mates. Marriage, often with its accompanying rituals and gift exchanges, involves the community in a couple's pair bond. That is, community members are third parties who monitor, gossip about, and potentially sanction those who violate marriage norms. Widely shared standards of behavior prescribe economic, social, and sexual roles, as well as the obligations and contributions required by each spouse and their relatives. Cross-culturally, marriage norms govern such arenas as 1. Whom one can marry, for example, incest taboos; 2. How many partners one can marry, polygamy; 3. What the inheritance rights are and who a legitimate heir is; 4. Where the new couple will live, with the wife's parents, matrilocal, or with the husband's parents, patrilocal; and 5. What the rules are regarding sex outside the pair bond. By helping to guarantee that a male is in fact the genetic father of the offspring produced by his mate, pair bonding brings males into the raising of offspring, or at least makes them more tolerant of their mate's offspring. Paternity certainty captures the notion that, in some species, males have to worry about whether they are the genetic father. All other things being equal, the more paternity certainty a male has, the more willing he will be to invest in his mate's offspring. In many primates, including chimpanzees, females mate promiscuously, so males usually have little or no idea who their offspring are, and they don't care much. Even in pair-bonding primates, male investment is pretty minimal, such as in gorillas, where males act only to protect their mates and their offspring from other males. By reinforcing pair bonds, marriage norms can make better fathers, and, failing that, they can make more fathers, as we'll explore. Most, but not all, societies have social norms that regulate the wife's sexual fidelity, that is, no cheating, and about 1/4 also constrain the husband in some way. Both kinds of norms can increase the man's investment in his wife's children. Social norms about sexual fidelity mean not only that the husband is monitoring his wife's sexual and romantic life, but so is the rest of the community, making it much tougher for the wife to behave in ways that might lower the husband's confidence that his wife's children are indeed his children. This has a psychological impact on the husband, motivating him to invest more in his wife's offspring, because they are more likely to be his. Wives also know that if they are caught violating fidelity norms, for example, having sex with someone else, it will influence their reputation with people well beyond their current husband and his kin. On the husband's side, norms that constrain his sexual behavior also inhibit, not prevent, him from diverting resources away from his family in efforts to obtain extramarital sexual opportunities. That is, have affairs, pay prostitutes, etc. Again, for the same reason, a community is now monitoring him, and violations of these norms can affect his relationships well beyond that with his wife and her kin. By curbing his ability to freely divert resources in seeking sex, social norms about fidelity can help channel the husband's resources to his wife's children. Of course, in societies that permit or encourage men to have multiple wives, polygyny, men are likely to use any extra resources or wealth to obtain more wives. By binding husbands and wives together for longer than would otherwise be the case, and increasing paternity certainty, some marriage norms can create, or at least strengthen, links to the husband's relatives, including his parents, siblings, and even kids he might have with other wives in a polygynous society. For children, this dramatically expands their kinship networks, firming up their links to paternal grandparents, aunts, and uncles. While close genealogical relatedness often does not underpin a final relationships, though it may, there remains a common evolutionary interest. For both the wife and husband, marriage norms create affines, in-laws, those whom you are related to through marriage, which come with both benefits and responsibilities, as we will explore. My sister-in-law, Elise, and I do not share any genetic variants through our recent common descent. We aren't related. But we both share a genetic interest in my children, who are genetically related to both of us. To my knowledge, no evidence indicates that this shared interest has been exploited by natural selection in primates, probably because a species needs to both live in larger social groups and have enduring pair bonds, which primates are not good at. In Chapter 16, I'll return to the question of how and why pair bonding might have emerged in our particular evolutionary lineage. Making dads. In building a broader kinship network, social norms and practices connect a child more tightly to his or her father's side of the family in subtle ways. In contrast to many complex societies, mobile hunter-gatherer populations usually emphasize kinship through both the mother and father and permit new couples much flexibility in where they can live after marriage. However, there's always that problem of paternity certainty for the dad's entire side. Among the Jokwansi, mobile hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, social norms dictate that a newborn's father, or more accurately the mother's husband, has the privilege of naming the child. These norms also encourage him to name the child after either his mother or father, depending on the infant's sex. Jokwansi believe name-sharing helps the essence of the paternal grandparents live on, and it consequently bonds both the grandparents and the father's whole side of the family to the newborn. Relatives of the grandparents often refer to the newborn using the same kinship term they use for his or her older namesake. That is, the grandfather's daughter will call the newborn baby father. This bias to the father's side is particularly interesting since Jokwansi kinship relationships are otherwise quite gender egalitarian, emphasizing equally the links to both mom's and dad's sides of the family. This biased naming practice may help create that symmetry by evening out the imbalance that paternity uncertainty leaves behind. In many modern societies, where social norms favoring the father's side have disappeared, the effect of paternity certainty emerges as maternal grandparents, uncles, and aunts invest more than the same paternal relatives do. Thus, Jokwansi practices link newborns directly to their father's parents, and simultaneously, via the use of close kin terms like father and sister, pull all of the dad's relatives closer. More broadly, in Jokwansi society, sharing the same name is an important feature of social life, which has many economically important implications. Psychologically, creating namesakes may work in two interlocking ways. First, even among undergraduates and professors, experiments suggest that sharing the same, or even a similar, name increases people's liking for the other person, their perceptions of similarity, and their willingness to help that person. In one study, for example, professors were more likely to fill out a survey and mail it back if the cover letter was signed by someone with a name similar to their own name. The perception of similarity suggests that namesakes may somehow spark our kin psychology, since we already know we use other cues of similarity, appearance, to assess relatedness. Second, even if this same name trick doesn't actually spark any change in immediate feelings, it still sets the appropriate social norms, the reputational standards monitored by others, which among the Zhukwanxi specify all kinds of important things about relationships, ranging from meat-sharing priorities to waterhole ownership. Norms related to naming or namesake relationships are common across diverse societies, and many people in small-scale societies intuitively know the power of namesakes, as my Yasawan friends with names like Josepha, Joseteki, and Josesis often remind me. My own kids are named Joshua, Jessica, and Zoe, thus matching my own first name by first initial or by rhyming. While many evolution and economics-oriented researchers have often assumed that social norms such as these are merely a superficial window dressing on our evolved psychology, the evidence suggests that such social norms run deep and profoundly shape social life. To throw these effects into stark relief, let's have a look at societies in which social norms and beliefs about marriage, 1. only lightly regulate pair bonding, 2. structurally eliminate marriage and suppress pair bonding, thereby dispensing entirely with husbands, dads, and in-laws, and 3. encourage, or at least permit, women to obtain secondary fathers for their children, creating additional social fathers. Societies with few or weak marriage norms provide us with a sense of how much work marriage norms are actually doing, in contrast to the effect of our innate pair-bonding instincts. Consider the Ache, who before contact were mobile hunter-gatherers in the forests of Paraguay, South America. Pre-contact Ache did form somewhat enduring bonds between mates, and these bonds were important for linking children to their paternal relatives. However, while social norms did prohibit relationships between siblings, first cousins, and individuals in certain ritual relationships, community-wide expectations otherwise appeared to have little to say about the behavior of those involved in pair bonds, and the formation of pair bonds was not marked by communal rituals or public promises. Divorce was initiated unilaterally by either party and involved simply moving out, which was easy since the Ache didn't have much stuff. A sequence of pair-bonded relationships began around age 14 for women and 19 for men. Early marriages were typically interspersed with other, more fleeting romances, but usually became more stable once a woman had 2 or 3 kids with the same man. By age 30, women had experienced an average of 10 marriages, and first marriages ended in divorce at a rate of 100%. Postmenopausal women reported an average of 13 marriages, and most women had children with different fathers. While enduring polygamous relationships were uncommon, 4%, every woman had been in a polygamous marriage at some point. Most of these involved multiple wives with one husband, but a few went the other way. Some men had serially married and had children with 3 sisters. Some women reported marrying both the father and his son at different times, and men reported having married both the mother and then her daughter. This suggests that the more demanding marriage norms found in most societies, for better or worse, operate to reinforce our otherwise flimsy pair-bonding instincts. No fathers. In the provinces of Yunnan and Sichuan in China, the Na and 3 other ethnic groups have maintained societies without husbands or fathers for at least a millennia, despite aggressive efforts by the Chinese government to introduce their own preferred marriage norms. This stable society is organized around female-headed matrilineal households. Children are conceived principally during furtive visits, in which men slip into women's houses for sex and are gone by morning. The paternity of children is not a concern, and is often uncertain, and genetic fathers are not expected to contribute to the child's household. Instead, men invest in their sisters' children. There are no terms in the local language for father, husband, or in-law. Of course, men and women do sometimes still form enduring relationships, but no norms regulate sexual exclusivity, permanence, rituals, or intra-pair obligations. Thus, social norms have organized this remarkably stable society by suppressing pair bonding and erasing patrilineal kinship. Multiple fathers. Even in societies with marriage, social norms and beliefs need not reinforce concerns about sexual fidelity that arise from male pair bonding psychology, but can instead promote investment in children in other ways. Many South American indigenous populations believe that a child forms in his or her mother's womb through repeated ejaculations of sperm, a belief system that anthropologists have labeled partible paternity. In fact, people in many of these societies maintain that a single ejaculation cannot sustain a viable pregnancy, and men must work hard with repeated ejaculations over many months to sustain a viable fetus. Women, especially after the first fetus appears, are permitted, and sometimes even encouraged, to seek another man or men to have sex with in order to provide additional fathers for their future child. Anyone who contributes sperm to the fetus is a secondary father. In some of these societies, periodic rituals prescribe extramarital sex after successful hunts, which helps establish and formalize the creation of multiple fathers. Secondary fathers, often named at birth by the mother, are expected to contribute to the welfare of their children, for example by delivering meat and fish, although not as much as the primary father, the mother's husband. Frequently, the secondary father is the husband's brother. Obtaining a second father is adaptive, at least sometimes. Detailed studies among both the Bari in Venezuela and the Aceh show that kids with exactly two fathers are more likely to survive past age 15 than kids with either one father or three or more fathers. Importantly, social norms cannot just make male sexual jealousy vanish. Men don't like it when their wives seek sex with other men. However, rather than being supported by their communities in monitoring and punishing their wives for sexual deviations, they are the ones acting defiantly, violating social norms, if they show or act on their jealousy. Reputational concerns and norms are flipped around here, so now the husband has to control himself. In the eyes of the community, it's considered a good thing for an expectant mother to provide a secondary father for her child. Marriage norms help expand human kinship systems by harnessing our pair bonding instincts. In doing this, norms variously exploit the shared fitness interests of in-laws, the willingness of men to invest in the offspring of women they've had sex with, and the power of namesakes. They also variously sometimes suppress male sexual jealousy, in partible paternity, male parental investment, among the Na, female extramarital sexual desires, most societies, and polygynous pair bonding in societies with monogamous marriages. As societies expanded and became more complex, marriage norms were increasingly used to build intergroup alliances, to promote peace, and to sustain larger-scale forms of social organization. But even in the simplest human societies, these norms have long been at work shaping social life.